Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Tom Johnson. I am CEO of H Advisors and the CEO of H Advisors Abernathy in the States. We are here today to talk to you about communications considerations and stakeholder engagement strategies for navigating media leaks and high-stakes M&A situations. This is one of the real specialties of our network, and our goal here today is to really guide you through our finding on how prevalent leaks have become in today's business environment, to cover off the regulatory implications when those leaks occur in various markets around the world, to discuss strategies on how companies should prepare for that reality, and to discuss some of the media trends behind this heightened risk of leaks that we are all observing. Our speakers today are Dan Scorpio, who's the head of M&A at H Advisors Abernathy here in the States and the author of our annual leaks report. Sam Turvey, who's managing partner at H Advisors Maitland in the UK. Alienor Miens, who's a partner at H Advisors in Paris, and Volker Heck, who's a partner with H Advisors Dieklinghart in Germany. So thank you all for joining us here today. I'd like to start with some data about how often leaks occur in M&A situations. Our firm has run some extensive annual research on this, and the bottom line is deals leak a lot, as many of our audience members know. Dan, can you tell us what our research found?
Thanks, Tom. And you are right that deals leak a lot, and a lot more than they used to even. Our firm tracks a full database of M&A transactions, and now we have more than 500 or so in our data set. We analyze this data on a regular basis to inform how we advise our clients and to bring really data-driven counsel to our M&A engagements. So onto the data. Last year, about 1/3 of deals with a transaction value of $2 billion or greater leaked through media before an announcement. For big deals, those that are $15 billion in value and greater, that number was about 70% that leaked ahead of time. That's a very large number. A big change last year that we saw in the data was that the average time that a deal leaked before its official announcement was 28 days. 2 years ago, that time period was 11 days. So if you think that 28 days, 1 month before an actual announcement that things are starting to leak into the market, that places a lot of pressure on companies and companies' advisors. And so in summary, a significant percentage of M&A transactions leak early. Deals are leaking earlier than they have before, and that places even greater importance on companies and their advisors to prepare in advance.
Alienor and Volker, do those numbers track with the trends that you're seeing in Europe?
Yes, if I may, hi. We've done the same screening of the main deals in France, and if we focus on the major operations, it seems that 85% of them resulted in leaks, actually. And in terms of when they occur, it's pretty much the same, because the average it's 25 days before the official announcement. But if we go in more granularity, we can see that 3/4 of them occur between 1 and 15 days before. So there is definitely a difference between the deals. And if we look specifically at the finance or insurance field deals, almost all of them resulted in leaks.
Numbers are quite comparable to what we have heard before. So the absolute figures are a little bit lower than in North America. But in line, generally, the results are in line with what Dan and Alienor have said. Especially for big deals, the numbers are rising, and the bigger, the earlier the leaks occur, and put pressure on the advisory teams as well as on the company side, because they have to be prepared at every step to get the transactions through and to minimize potential harm.
Sam, we in particular over the last 6 to 8 months been in a really choppy M&A market, and I know that is true of what you all are seeing in the UK. As a result, we've seen some new players come into the M&A practice, particularly private credit organizations taking a bigger role. I'm curious, does that change how deals leak in the UK? Is there any observations you have there you can share?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. I think as alternatives generally as an asset class has grown over the years, their involvement in M&A has grown too, not just in sort of typical buyout, but also in terms of the financing of deals, as banks have stepped back to an extent in certain places. That their risk agenda is slightly different. We've seen, direct lenders and private credit players step forward and increasingly sort of fill that gap. Does it really change the dynamics of how leaks are made? Probably not. But I think what it certainly does is it adds a new group of stakeholders that perhaps weren't traditionally there in quite the same volume. But just to give you a sense of things, I mean, last year, I was looking at a report on the scale of direct lending in Europe, and the first 9 months of the year there was about 51.6 billion euros worth of transactions happening across 705 different deals. In 2001, as we sort of bounced back from COVID, there was nearly 900. So that's a lot of new deal activity that's involving a lot of new players. So some of the bigger ones probably that we're more aware of, but I think what it does do is it means that for reporters, when they're thinking about their scoops and how they get onto the back of deals, they've just got perhaps a wider landscape of people to talk to.
As a former M&A reporter, I would have appreciated the wider landscape, but I think you're right about that. Okay, so we've established that deals are leaking more often, and that seems to be a global trend at this point. So now let's get down to how should companies and clients be thinking about that? Dan, maybe let's start with you and talk a little bit about how we advise clients on how to handle and prepare for immediate leaks.
This is such an important question. And the first step that we do working with a company in the early stages of an M&A transaction is to prepare a very in-depth leak response and scenario plan. And so that work includes anticipating the various scenarios that could take shape over the coming weeks, what level of information could start to dribble out into the market, where it could come from, how detailed, and so on. And then really mapping out a step-by-step action plan for each scenario. And so beyond the action plan too, that includes starting to prepare the initial drafts of the communications and investor materials that a company will need. Reactive media statements, background talking points, an update to the board if a story is about to leak and publish. Also a criteria for how companies should start to communicate with their employees and what they can say and what they can't say. It's really essential in this process at this time that management and the company's advisors, both communications, but also legal and financial advisors, are aligned and on the same page about this. One brief example, we were working with a company that was getting very close to announce a deal, and it leaked to media a couple of days early, and the stock was starting to run in a way that was concerning. And so, because the company had this leak plan very prepared and had already prepared its communications materials to announce the transaction early, they were able to move up and accelerate the announcement by a day or two, which was a really important strategic imperative for the company to get that deal done. So that's just one example that speaks to how important it is to prepare and prepare early.
And you just raised an interesting point in that when a deal leaks, our initial instinct is to really think about how will the market react, how do we contain the information in the market and communicate externally. I know one of the things that as a network we spend a lot of time on, though, is helping our clients think through every other stakeholder audience as well too. Leaks have the ability to really impact and introduce stress to employees, to customers, et cetera, and so on. Volker, I know this is an area where your firm really concentrates specifically, so I'd be curious to get your take on communicating with those other groups as well when there is a leak.
I think generally we have to keep in mind for Germany, we do have co-determination, for example, so we do have strong unions in the supervisory board, and of course the first step is what Dan has pointed out. For every transaction you need a clear planning, scenario planning, response plan for possible leaks. But for Germany, for example, from my own experience in doing deals, you also have to think about the internal customers, and of course you have to think about the unions, because they have a strong say in every transaction due to their role in the supervisory board. They always get contacted by press, so they are always very near to the press people and to the media outlets. And of course, many employees are sometimes concerned about a possible transaction. What does it mean for me and my working place? So this is another target group you should keep in mind, and you have to integrate into your league plan how to deal with these stakeholders and how to treat them well, because what you don't need in the case of a league is confusion and additional trouble. So you have to integrate these stakeholders into this league plan as well.
And Alienor, how should companies think about, particularly with those audiences that Volker just mentioned? So many of our clients now have operations across borders, and so how do you think about leak strategies in particular as you're going from market to market, where there are some of the concerns that Volker just mentioned? They'll have regulatory concerns, which we'll touch on a little later in this webcast. I'd be curious to get your take on how we advise clients who need to think about this in different jurisdictions around the globe.
Sure. Especially when there are, in fact, in France, the social aspects of the deal are definitely a key issue to be anticipated in France, as employment is very well and people are very well protected and is always under scrutiny by elected officials. The most visible case being when the state also is part of the company. Also, employee representatives are very much involved in the decision-making processes, which is also something really to take into account. So for companies, as you mentioned, it's really important to be prepared well in advance to anticipate and to protect their employee and to evaluate the impact of a potential leak. But on the other side, for potential bidders and debtors, it's something we have noticed in recent years that it's something they really take into account now, and they integrate into their plan the fact that they have to propose acceptable solutions for the employees, and even we have noticed, especially in the past 2 years, that some actors have even taken the step of being the best bidder on social issues, even when they are from abroad, to reassure on their intention and preempt any criticism. So really, France has long time has been always a difficult country, but now from company side and from investor side, it's really taken into account, and it's even totally integrated into their approach.
Dan, we've talked a lot about the various audiences here and how to think about communicating with the various audiences in terms of a leak. I'm wondering if you can comment on the speed that you need to respond to a leak, right? How important are those first, not just the first 24 hours, but the first hours after a leak comes out in terms of getting on top of the message and on top of your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. You know, I think certainly, you know, in deals that involve the sort of private markets, public markets, you know, PLCs in the UK, you know, there's obviously a code that's being followed once that process kicks off, which we can talk a little bit more about later if you like. But I think those first 24 hours is where really all of the plans that Dan was talking about earlier start to get rolled out and executed. And, you know, I think a really well-disciplined company does that well, but also maintains an element of nimbleness in what they're doing to respond to whatever the type of leak is. You know, the truth is, reporters, when they get leaks, they don't necessarily have all the information. They have some of it, so you need to make decisions on the course of action you want to take. But generally speaking, if it's a big scoop and you know, a lot of information is out there, you know, your talking points and what you're letting the market know is absolutely crucial at that phase, and both the buy side and the sell side will be doing the same thing. You know, the way that the rolling news works these days is the initial news flow is usually quite factual based on the information that's out there or following a particular leak scoop. But there's a lot of reporters hungry to take that story on and to move it on and to fill the unanswered questions. And that's what we as advisors are doing at this stage, trying to anticipate what next and what the next piece of chess play that happens is going to be, and hopefully through the scenarios we've planned, we're in a good position to do that. And you'll start to have commentators, for example, and columnists following on if it's a particularly big or interesting deal, or a deal that in this country in particular is of interest to the consumer. Those commentators and columnists will start to opine as well. They take a slightly different approach to that initial flow of news reporting. So all of this happening probably in the first 24 hours or so. So really important to sort of jump on it quickly as an advisory team.
I want to go back to something Volker mentioned earlier, which is we've been focusing a lot on how we respond internally and externally to leaks. But one of the real complexity about media leak situations is just the regulatory requirements market by market really vary, right? The U.S. is relatively straightforward compared to some other countries, but one of the things we always find is when our clients go into European markets in particular, we really have to get up to speed on how the regulatory systems work there. So maybe just to go around to our European partners here, say maybe let's start with you to talk a little bit about the UK takeover code and how that ultimately impacts leak strategies at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's sort of classic Europe, isn't it? Sort of highly regulated markets, fragmented. It's a tricky place to navigate around, and they all have their own quirks. Yeah, I mean, in the UK we have the takeover panel. I mean, it's an independent body that will be supervising the rollout of the takeover code, which is a set of rules that dictates really the etiquette with which that you do public transactions. Obviously, what tends to happen is, if there is a leak, there will be a statement that is necessary that tends to respond to media speculation. Now, the depth and breadth of what that response is up to the advisory team to decide on the amount of information that needs to come out, the specific dynamics of what's being discussed as part of the deal. But that in turn then rolls out a series of other statements according to the rules of that code. So it is highly regulated. There is some interesting debate in this country about the right time to be making announcements according to the code. It's quite a deep debate about the responsibilities on boards and management teams to disclose and when the right time is, etc. But generally speaking, the code is adhered to very strictly, and it includes on weekends. If there's a piece that appears in a Sunday newspaper, and there's plenty of examples of it, the takeover panel will be exploring the nature of that leak on a Sunday, and it's all eyes that then turn to Monday morning and market opening and what might potentially happen in terms of other disclosures that need to come out, and obviously everyone's watching the stock price, etc. But that, generally speaking, is how the beginnings of that rolls out.
Thank you. And Volker, I know that the German regulations can be quite strict in these situations. Can you talk a little bit about what's required there and how companies decide whether or not to issue an ad hoc release as part of a media leak?
Yes, thank you. So I think Sam has outlined the regulatory framework quite well. From my own experience as advisor or within the company, you plan, as Dan has shown, you plan in advance for any leak. Of course, that leaks can happen. Of course, the more stakeholders you have, as I mentioned before, for example, at the unions, it makes the game more riskier. If there are leaks, you hope that the leaks will not occur too early, but they will happen, and you have to be prepared for that as well. Of course, we have a holding statement, which always starts with, we don't comment on rumors as a general policy. But if a rumor becomes very specific or quite specific, you have to be prepared for that as well, because then the holding statement will not work. And basically, from my experience, it's always advisable to be hopefully in a situation where you just have to inform the transaction team, the legal people as well, and the board, in case it's necessary, have a formal board meeting just to make a protocol of what has been discussed, for example, before as well, and then to be able to run an official statement or otherwise an ad hoc release, because this is what you have to do in a certain amount of time, and you don't the window for that is not too long, so you have to prepare for that as well. The regulatory requirements are quite strong, and this should be all of this should be part of the scenario planning which has been mentioned before.
Alienor, is this the same as how it operates in France?
Yeah, it's pretty much. Actually, it depends whether we are with listed or non-listed company. For a listed company, obviously, we've got the regulator, the AMF, putting rules on the market to ensure equal information for all shareholders, but and with strict rules. But for a private company, I mean not listed, what we do also is that we always work with lawyers and bankers to ensure that we comply with the law. So, but with that in mind, then the communication approach is really more likely linked to the strategy of the transaction. The idea is always to either to protect, but also to succeed in the transaction. So, well managed leak is definitely part of the strategy, whether in a defense or in attack. So it's definitely something we have to prepare in advance wherever the situation is. But as you mentioned, Sam, the timing is key in communications, because we want to be first to communicate, to be sure to put our messages and talking points on the market, because it's a very good way to influence. But also communicating on the Sunday, for instance, has a lot of power sometimes, because it's very much harder for the other protagonists to react, for instance. But also the choice of the reporter can be very important. With no surprise in France, with our sample of transactions, we noticed that Les Echos, which is the main economic media, very institutional, is responsible for half of the leaks. It's because also we need to control and it's important to secure the way the leaks are managed. But sometimes that it could be on a Sunday with a Journal Dimanche and so on. So it's definitely a part of the deal strategy to include the communication. Is definitely part of the business plan even, and even as a funny fact, in France we even have some deals still pending, but with absolutely no official communication and only working through leaks. So we are aware of what's going on with working on it, the price, the protagonist, who made an offer, who finally declined the offer, blah, 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 just by leaks with absolutely no official communication and no official press release.
I want to close with a few questions just about the media that covers M&A, and I know it's the other part of this webinar. We're going to be talking to a couple of those journalists, so this is your opportunity to see how close you get to the answers they're going to give as part of that. But obviously, there are many more reporters and publications chasing M&A deals today than there used to be. It used to be concentrated among the main financial publications. Now, really, you go market by market. There's a number of people that chase M&A deals, and there's a lot of value placed on getting M&A scoops. So maybe let's start in the UK, where you have all those dynamics at play, including some of these new, what I like to call more digital publications that have become sort of fast growing and very popular. Sam, what are you seeing in the UK? Who are breaking deals? Is it still the big outlets? Is it still or is it now moved to some more of these smaller digital publications? And then we'll go market by market and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a super interesting area, this, because what people may traditionally have thought are the kind of outlets that break news, deal news, is not necessarily the case today. I mean, as we've seen the proliferation of media in the digital domain with paywalls going up, etc., Substack and a number of other kind of digital only newsletters and forums and that kind of thing that have really expanded in more recent years, and a lot of really good quality journalists have gone to set up their own little platforms, and they've got great contacts, great relationships. They've got a super nose for stories and scoops, etc. So yeah, I think what we're seeing here is, I don't have the data in front of me, but I would bet really good money that Bloomberg is breaking the most stories by far, and that's probably not just in the UK but everywhere. They're well resourced. They've got big teams in London, in the States, in virtually every market. And they can hunt as a pack, and they can do really great things together. But that said, there are a number of platforms that can be 1-2 people behind a heavy paywall, and that's their business model that chase down really great deal stories. And it's quite hard actually for communications teams to track who's going to break a story or who's going to pick something up because of that proliferation of media outlets that are doing it. We have something over here called Beataville, run by a guy called Ben Harrington. He's a great guy, and he breaks great stories all the time, and quite often you'll find that there are a number of other outlets that are following what he does and having to report on the back of his and try to get the next step of the story. So I think what it means for us is that we're looking at a wider pool of relationships outside the traditional media. I think it means that we're monitoring and watching a much wider variety of outlets too. And I think it does change the dynamic a bit in terms of when things pop up and when things don't. Quite often it's easy if it's a Bloomberg. If you're sitting by a terminal, you can see the story go up. If it's sitting behind a paywall on a more niche M&A deals focused blog, maybe not so much. So we go back to that point we were making earlier about the first 24 hours. I think it really changes the dynamics of your timing and how quick you can be. So so that's probably what's happening in the UK.
Yeah, and you gave us some pretty scary numbers about how often things are leaking here in the US earlier. How does the environment compare to what Sam just mentioned in the UK?
So it's very similar to what Sam laid out, in that a big factor in why so many deals leak and why they are leaking earlier in the process is partly because there is such a greater number of reporters following M&A in the United States as well. You have legacy media that used to have maybe one reporter, now has 2, 3, 4 reporters covering M&A, and you have really had newsletters and the like, where some outlets now have half a dozen or so. So in a situation where currently M&A volume is down compared to the last couple years, but you have more reporters chasing the deals that are happening, that leads to that competitive factor that we've talked about, and leads to it really contributes to why reporters are so eager to get out there first, because they know that there's a bigger group of folks chasing the same information. I also think it's important to remember that reporters are very good at this. They are very skilled at asking the right questions to the right people at the right time and following the breadcrumbs into something that they can report out. They're very talented. And so that's really why we always tell folks, when it comes to media and M&A situations, don't try this at home. It's really important to rely on professionals who have the trusted relationships, who know how to have those conversations. That's really important in these situations too.
And for first Alienor and then Volker, I'm curious how this compares to what you see in your markets. Is it still the primary financial publications and wires that are covering and breaking M&A, or do you also see local publications and some of these new publications like we're seeing in other markets play a role as well?
Definitely in France, it's mostly financial papers, economic and financial papers, and we've got even a serial leak journalists, very well known here on the market, especially at Les Echos, but not only, especially because the trade media are really powerful also, notably the retail sector, for instance, and they really are followed by the other journalists. And for some of them, it's very important to we talked about preparation to have very good connections with them, because it's very difficult to track all of them, but also because they they know the sector very well. They know all the protagonists very well, and they are very, as you said, Dan, at ease with calling everyone in a few hours to get all the info and just confront all the talking points and so on. So one last thing maybe is that LinkedIn, social media in general, are very important. So it's not only media, proper media, I would say, but also they use their social media influence to get on the market very quickly, sometimes even before what they write on the newspaper.
And just to add to that, from the German perspective, I think what Sam and Dan have mentioned earlier as well it holds true for Germany as well. So we of course also have Bloomberg and Reuters as the top newsbreakers, mainly coming from the financial market and with financial market information. We do have companies who at a certain time push for their own story and go to outlets like Handelsblatt, which is the Les Echos in Germany, basically, or go directly to Financial Times. And we do, as I mentioned before, we do have certain risk of leakages from the union side as well. And they are, from my experience in more than 20 years in the company, sometimes more linked to the regional papers because they have tight relations with them. So there's a variety of outlets to have a look at, but it's mainly for the big deals are still Bloomberg and Reuters, some niche players for certain sectors like insurance, which are working behind a paywall, as Sam has mentioned, but it's still a traditional game with more actors and making the game more riskier for the people in the company, for the press people.
I would add, I think Alienor made such a great point that, I would echo that in our latest research piece, we also looked beyond just media, but to look at what happens online for a company's online profile in a leak situation. And what we found was really interesting that for M&A transactions that leak, 9 times out of 10, the #1 most visited online source of news in the 24 hours that followed was the company's own website and social media channels. And so what that really means is, and we're really advising our clients that in situations like this, you have to put in place an owned content and an owned media strategy to help you keep control when something leaks. It's really important.
I want to close with a question just to wrap up the media topic about how easy those that are chasing deals are to work with from a communications perspective, right? We've talked a lot about the hyper competitive environment to break news. We know there is a lot of competition among these individual reporters, market by market, to be first, to get the scoop, etc. A lot of times our clients ask us about, well, can we work with this journalist? Can we get them to hold off on the story? Can we make sure that they include certain information in the story? How easy is it for each of you in these individual markets to work with journalists chasing these deals, to be able to talk to them about, and help background them on to make sure that they get certain information correct about the deal or the environment that the deal is being done in? And I particularly think about that as we are dealing with a heightened regulatory and antitrust environment too, right? Where there's additional scrutiny on that. So Dan, maybe I'll start with you, and we'll just go market by market here to wrap up.
Yeah, I'll start quickly, and I would say it's never easy, but it is important. And especially in an environment like we are in now, where transactions of all shapes and sizes are really being scrutinized, we're finding that it's more important than even in recent past to work with reporters and really making sure that the right messages that matter to a company's stakeholders groups are in the first story that publishes, right? To Sam's point earlier, the first 24 hours really is key. And so working on that first story can be really important. The importance here is all about relationships. And, it's not an easy process, and the media have their own demands, their own needs, their own bosses. But if we, and this is really how we pride ourselves, have relationships and build trust over years with these folks, we can have that conversation in a way that that benefits our clients and that can work for the reporter as well. And so that's a really important piece to keep in mind as you go through that process in a transaction situation.
And how about in the UK?
Yeah, relationships are everything in this regard. I mean, they're all slightly different. They have their own personalities and quirks, but there are some trends that tend to bind them all together. I mean, they are tenacious. You know, they will. They're pretty hungry. They want to move quickly, but at the same time, I think they appreciate, particularly if you're representing, you know, one of the sources on the deal. You know, that you're pretty important to them. So I think if your relationship is good, then you can really help them to be accurate, and to be confident in what they're saying is not going to land them in hot water too. And you know, there's plenty of examples where M&A reporters might be great at M&A, but they don't necessarily know something about a specific company or a sector. And you know, you're not necessarily talking about the deal at all, but you're trying to help them understand the dynamics of an industry that they're playing. They're talking about. You know, they might not know where a company is headquartered or how its you know, its ownership structure works. And so a lot of the information is just publicly available factual information that you're trying to help them interpret and understand, and it, you know, that doesn't really fall foul of any regulatory requirements. That's just a conversation where you have to be a good communicator with people that want to move fast. So you know, I find that where you're helpful in that regard, you know, the relationship improves, and ultimately you know, that net is a kind of a win for everybody. So that's probably, you know, my takeaway on that.
Volker, how about in Germany?
I think just to add on that, I've been on the company side in many deals, so it's always a walk on the tightrope basically. So on the one side, the regulatory framework has to be obeyed. Everybody has signed an NDA. On the other side, you have a CEO, and even if the deal is closed at 3 in the morning, he wants his peers to read it in the 7 o'clock newspapers, basically, with his peers reading that he has done the greatest deal ever. So you have to bring those ends together. You can only do that via people you can have in which you have and whom you have completely trust, and this trust has to be built up over years, and this cannot be bought for cheap and easily. So a lot of experience is needed, a lot of good contacts is needed to bring this through. And of course, it's always a certain risk. It's always in, because you put your head onto the block if something goes wrong, and this has to be this risk has to be seen as well.
Alienor, maybe you could close us out here with what you see in France. Sure.
But just definitely that's our job to make sure that we keep the control, and that the good talking points are in the articles, and especially when we've got a very short time, but and to select the good journalists and so on. But also we see that it's very important for companies to be prepared in advance for leaks, but also to prepare for any situation, and to meet journalists regularly, because if you create a connection, you mentioned Sam, sometimes it's an M&A journalist, but most of the time it's a sector journalist who covers the story. And if you already have a relationship with that journalist, and if the journalist knows about your strategy and so on, it's much easier to expose your position into the situation wherever you are going. So really get prepared. And then we can help you really decide how to manage the leaks, and to be sure to orientate the messages in a very good manner. And off the record approach is most of the time very important and necessary. And we know the journalists, we have to deal with reporters, so we select the most appropriate ones, because it's really important not to have a wrong information circulating into the market. And that's definitely something we all want to avoid for the success of a deal, but also for the success of the company and its strategy.
Great. Well, thank you to you all for adding your insights to this webinar. I know that that Sam and Dan have a second part to this, where they'll actually be talking to some journalists about these exact topics. So I hope everyone tunes in for that as well. But really appreciate all of you taking the time and lending your perspectives. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to talk about these topics further. It's something that we deal with every day. Thank you very much.